I'd like to talk about an influencer who's just informed 25,000 people in 2 days of a new language learning method of his invention. And I don't usually pay much attention to what influencers do, but there is a recurring pattern that's becoming hard to ignore. Complex ideas from linguistics and psychology gets turned into confident, simplified so-called methods that spread extremely fast online. And in the process, something important gets lost: caution. Because formal training in language and pedagogy isn't just about learning facts at university. It teaches a way of thinking, how to handle uncertainty, how to deal with competing theories, how to read research carefully, and how not to jump from observation to conclusion. Because without that, it's very easy to take ideas and turn them into something much more absolute than the research actually supports, as this influencer did. And this is what I'd like to look at today. Not because all influencers are bad or good, but because YouTube rewards certainty, especially in language learning, where certainty is usually exactly what the science doesn't give you. So let's look at how these claims are built and where the leap from research to method actually happens. So as I said, there's an influencer who just told 25,000 people in 2 days. He claims that he learnt Spanish in 3 months, the proof being that he's just had a conversation with an italki tutor, and the method he used was mocked by all initially, so it's sort of the narrative of the misunderstood hero, but he's uncovered a truth that the conservative system doesn't want to hear about. His central theory is that language works in blocks. He then claims that native speakers speak in terms of ready-made blocks that they retrieve from their mind, somewhere in their mind, and that if a person learns these blocks, it makes for better results, much better results. The first problem I see with this so-called method is that he tried method A and said it worked much better than methods B, C or D, which he never tried. And since he started Spanish from scratch, as he tells us, he never tried any other method. But he does say this is the absolute best method ever, so already his conclusion is extremely wobbly. Second, he forgets about all the hidden variables, such as his own motivation. He forgets that the desire to learn is often more important than the way by which we learn. So to him it's all about the method. It's a very polarized view, but it's the sort of thing that works on YouTube. So let's see what he says exactly. He tells us in the video, and I quote, "Native speakers don't build sentences word by word. They retrieve them whole, pre-assembled like Lego blocks, Lego bricks, already snapped together." And in 1983, 2 linguists named Andrew Pawley and Francis Sider wrote a paper that changed how applied linguists think about fluency. They argued that fluent native speakers have thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands, of memorized sentence stems stored in their heads, so they don't construct. So if they don't construct, I was wondering if you could, from grammar rules. They pull it off the shelf, he says, end of quote. So he's referring to native speakers who pull ready-made sentences off the shelf. He then quotes another study: 58% of spoken English is made of prefabricated chunks. Other studies pushed that number to 80% in casual conversations. So play that part again, because more than half of what comes out of a fluent speaker's mouth is not invented in the moment. It's retrieved from memory, end of quote. There's several issues with this. First, no one knows what actually happens in the mind when we speak. No one's opened the brain like a car engine and said, this is absolutely how the engine works. No one said this is how storage works and how retrieval works. Second, if some linguists, under a certain angle, made the observation that words could be potentially grouped together according to a certain definition, they likely never said, hey, just go along and learn these blocks. He also says that native speakers retrieve ready-made sentences. It's partly true, such as when we say, I don't know, you can consider it a ready-made block, saying, I don't know. You don't have to think about the sentence, I don't know, you just say, I don't know. Okay, so that's partly true, that you retrieve this as a block, but it's not generally true to say that. It can't be proven, and besides, you can verify this for yourself. As soon as you describe something more complex, you usually search for words. You're not just retrieving it off the shelf, are you? He also uses the terms chunks and memory, which he doesn't define. I don't know what a chunk is, and I study the damn stuff at university. So he attempts to speak like a linguist, in the manner of a linguist, by drawing from research and oversimplifies terms, and that the authors probably had to define in their paper with extreme precision. There's another thing also, he's making his viewers believe that a linguistics paper on linguistics, actually proves a definite thing. Have you ever read a paper on linguistics? It really does. Linguistics papers are dreary things. They're awful. They're highly complex. They're not written in ordinary language at all. And he's treating it as if he read a book of truths. The influencer then quotes someone called Paul Nation, who apparently has a learning methodology called the 4 strands. And I quote, the influencer tells us, he argues, speaking about Paul Nation, he argues, a balanced learner should split time roughly equally between input, output, fluency practice in deliberate study, and deliberate study probably. And so memorizing sentences belongs in that 4th bucket. The influencer has just concluded that the part of your learning program that should contain memorization might as well be used to memorize chunks, which, by the way, he doesn't give the definition of. You see what he just did? I'll repeat this slowly. The influencer says, Paul Nation argues that a balanced learner should split time roughly equally between input, output, fluency practice and deliberate study. Makes sense to me. End of quote. And so, memorizing sentences belongs in that 4th bucket. So that last sentence was the influencer's conclusion based on something that his own quote didn't say. His own quote never said that. The influencer then says, and I quote, when a beginner tries to construct a sentence in real time, pick the right vocabulary word, conjugate the verb, get the gender right, remember the word order, they exhaust their working memory in 2 seconds, and so that's why they freeze. Now imagine that you've memorized, I'd like to order as a single unit. Okay, I'd like to order is a unit. You don't compute it, you just retrieve it. Work in memory free, ready for actual content. End of quote. There is such oversimplification going on here. He says that a beginner freezes because they think too much. He then refers to working memory, that he doesn't define, by the way. Most importantly to me, this influencer hasn't been in the position of seeing hundreds of students work on their fluency, as I have. The reason they speak slowly isn't because they haven't learned so-called units. There are many, many more factors at play here. Psychological, linguistic, but also factors linked to their study time. Then the influencer does exactly the same thing as he did with his quote from Paul Nation. For the 2nd time, he takes a quote and says, this is what they mean. They mean you have to learn ready-made sentences. No, kids, sorry, this is not what your carefully chosen quote says. The influencer says, quote, so there is a cognitive theory called skill acquisition theory, developed by Robert de Keyser It says that any complex skill like playing piano, driving, speaking a language moves through 3 stages. Okay, seems reasonable to me. First, you know the rule. Second, you can apply it slowly and consciously. And third, you can do it automatically without thinking. The only thing that gets you from stage 2 to stage 3 is repetition, lots of it on the same units. That's exactly what memorizing sentences and dialogues is. No, that was the end of it, by the way. The quote didn't say that. You decided that's what the quote said. You're injecting your own view into that quote for the second time. He then goes on to say, quote, every major finding from cognitive psychology in the last 30 years points to the same conclusion, which is that actively recalling chunks of language repeatedly over time is one of the most efficient ways to learn anything, end of quote. This is such a blanket statement. It's just a lie. It's not even a blanket statement. It's just a lie. And at this stage, he's fully incorporated the notion of chunk into his theory. He's well past ever explaining this. He's normalized his notion of chunk, just accept it. Then he throws out some outrageously vague pseudo-scientific sounding phrases that sounds very brainy and say nothing at all. I quote, so we have the linguistics, right? Native speech is mostly chunks. We also have the psycholinguistics. Chunks are processed faster and free up working memory. We have intervention studies. Explicit chunk memorization measurably improves perceived fluency. We have skill acquisition theory. Automaticity requires repetition. And we have decades of memory research validating the technique. End of quote. Vague, vague, and more vague. I don't even know what he's on about. I have no clue what he's talking about. He's completely forgotten that the listener hasn't even accepted the reality of anything to do with chunks, or even if it's a linguistic category. We don't even know this. Who said that a chunk was a linguistic category? So now he's telling us that it's been proven and proven again for the past 30 years or something. Then he goes back to his final Spanish test, as he calls it, his final test, and explains a hidden benefit to his method. He tells us, quote, I knew exactly what my final test was going to be, a 30-minute conversation with a native Colombian tutor, so I asked myself a simple question. What is going to come up in that conversation? Easy. Where I'm from, what I do, why I'm learning Spanish, my YouTube channel, the challenge itself, my French background, my favourite shows, my family. So I sat down and wrote short speeches on every one of those topics, multiple speeches in Spanish with help from AI to make sure that the texts were actually correct. Then I memorized them, whole sentences, whole patterns, whole transitions, whole speeches, and a lot of people online are going to call this cringe. You're just reciting, you're not really speaking, end of quote. Correct. You've memorized sentences that might never come up again and that prove that you're able to recite these pre-learned sentences. And at this point, we've still said nothing about your pronunciation, nor of the tutor's feedback. The whole thing is so dreadfully sloppy, he remains the sole judge of his Spanish and the inventor of his own tests. It's incredible. He then shares with us a hidden benefit of his method, and I quote, but here's what actually happened in the final conversations. He seems to say that there are more than one conversation. I did not recite the speeches word for word. I never had to. What happened is that the pattern in scientist speeches, the connectors, the transitions, the way of expressing opinions, and time and cause and effect, it was already automatic in my head, he tells us. I don't know what this means. He didn't recite, he rather, what? Benefited from something automatic? That's what he's saying. Something automatic happened. So now he's distinguishing reciting with being automatic. Somehow. He then tells us, so when the people I talked to asked me an unexpected question, for example about soccer or something else, I didn't freeze. I had structures ready. The phrase, the truth is that it came out without thinking. The phrase, what I mean is that the phrase, for example, none of these required computation. They were retrieved, and that's kind of the magic. If you don't memorize speeches to recite them, you memorize them to internalize the building blocks so that when real conversation happens, you have spare working memory to think about what you want to say, not how you want to say it. And here's something I didn't expect. So what he noticed is that when he spoke, it didn't require so-called computation. His sentences were retrieved, and that's kind of the magic. You don't memorize speeches to recite them, you memorize them to internalize the building blocks so that when real conversations happen, you have spare working memory to think about what you want to say, not how you want to say it. And here's something I didn't expect. What he's doing here, he's putting labels on his results. He was happy with himself and his conversation in Spanish, and he decided that what was happening is that he was retrieving so-called structures, which he doesn't define. It didn't require computation, as he calls it, whatever that means. You just internalize building blocks, such as what? That, that the subject comes first, or that the verb follows the subject. I don't know what he means by building block. So this frees up his memory to think about what he wants to say. He's assuming that people, when they speak, think about what they want to say. For example, oh wait, what do I want to say? It's a plural subject, so the verb has to be in the plural also. Oh wait, how does it work in the past tense? He's not only criticizing a thing that doesn't exist, but he's imagining his own process. It's unbelievable. He then explains the learning process in 4 steps. Step 1 is identifying the situations you'll actually use in the language. So be honest. Just, you're learning Spanish for a trip to Mexico City. It's ridiculous. To Mexico City, that's going to be restaurants, taxis, hotels, asking for directions, maybe small talk. If you're learning Spanish for work, it's going to be introducing yourself, your job, your projects. If you're learning for a partner's family, it's family conversations, opinions, telling stories about yourself. End of quote. This is hysterical. Let's talk about this notion of so-called situation, which he assumes is a real thing. Like prepositions belong to situations. Verbs belong to situations. So if you say, I would like only belongs to restaurant. Is that it? It's absurd. So let's talk about this. Okay, situations. When my wife turns up in a bad mood because, I don't know, she had a bad day at work, is that a situation? Do I have to prepare for that specifically? Does that require specialized language? Do I need to prepare for this? When my lawnmower breaks down and I have to phone John Deere, is that another situation? How many situations are there? What is a situation? And how does it tie to language? He then tells us, step 2, quote, step 2, write short dialogues or speeches or sentences for every single situation. Multiple dialogues, multiple sentences, 2 or 3 minutes long. Get a native speaker or a competent AI tool to make sure that they sound natural. The robotic textbook phrases don't really help you, he tells us. You want phrases that real people actually say, end of quote. What he doesn't realize is that pronunciation is situation dependent. Different languages also use intonation in very different ways. In the case of English, it's extremely complex, it's extremely subtle. He's treating pronunciation as if it was a hyper-simplistic part of the language. He then tells us, quote, what you need to do is you need to force yourself to retrieve the dialogue or the sentence in your head. This is the key step, retrieval, not just reading. The harder it feels, the better the learning. After you retrieve the sentence in your mind, you need to practice saying it out loud at full speed until it's really automatic. Do this every day, 15 minutes. You can do more, but really 15 minutes is good. And step 6, this is what Paul Nation specifically warns about. Make sure that you also understand the parts. Don't just memorize as like a magic spell. End of quote. He tells us, quote, the whole point of chunks is that they teach you grammar through use, but you have to actually pay attention, and that's it. That's the whole technique, end of quote. We still don't know what a chunk is. We still don't know how this works for languages with declensions, for example, nor how he proposes to include intonation in this, nor how it works for situations that we're unprepared for, as usually happens in life. He doesn't explain how many so-called situations there are. What is a situation? What is a chunk? My issue with all of this is that his method is sloppy. His results show nothing more than showing that memorizing material can improve short-term conversational performance in predictable context. That's what it proves. He hasn't proven superiority over other methods. He hasn't proven long-term fluency. He hasn't proven deep grammatical acquisition. He hasn't proven spontaneous adaptability, and he hasn't proven generalizable competence. He remains the only judge of his Spanish. He designed his own test, he interprets his own results, and puts labels on what he assumes is going on in his mind. He's comparing his method to others he's never tried and says it's the best. He picks and chooses from linguistics to support his ideas. He reinterprets, he makes listeners believe that linguistics articles prove definite things. He never defines the terms he uses, and in the end he's proven, to me he's proven nothing. He had a 30-minute conversation with an italki tutor and assumed that this led to him internalizing the logic of Spanish in some way. 25,000 people in 2 days thought his video was brilliant. This is what happens when unqualified people give advice on language learning. My name's Chris from OuiCommunicate. I teach French. See you very soon. I hope this was useful. Be careful, be cautious. Don't just listen to anyone. See you soon.